Hey guys, Harper here. I know this has been done several times already by several other people on YouTube, but I wanted to give my own overview of what has happened in Neverwinter 2020. We'll start at the top of the year and go all the way to the drama that is the forefront of January 2021. I think you guys might be surprised at how much has happened this year. I mean, Lord knows I forgot about it. Longest year ever. Anyways, enough rambling. Let's go ahead and get this party started. At the top of the year, in January 2020, a new dungeon called the Infernal Citadel, also known as IC, or TIC, was introduced. There were high hopes for this new dungeon, as the last dungeon we saw before this was Tower of the Mad Mage. Now remember, Tom was still at a difficulty level that a majority of the player base couldn't even reach after months of grinding, so this new dungeon was a breath of fresh air. While IC wasn't a walk in the park, it offered challenging bosses with fun mechanics and mobs that could easily swarm and kill you if you didn't work as a team. For me, it felt that each boss was progressively harder as the dungeon went on. Teams could spend hours in this dungeon fighting, and when you finally cleared that final boss, it was quite a rewarding experience. This dungeon also introduced boss trophy drops, which could be exchanged for better gear. Granted, once you got all your gear, the incentive to run this longer dungeon was no longer that appealing. However, I still enjoy running this dungeon, be it with friends, alliance members, or random players. Now of course, we wouldn't have a new dungeon without some new mod action taking place. On January 21st, we began our descent into Avernus with Mod 18. We saw some new innovations like chapter releases and new world mechanics, such as instance-wide contribution to progress bars for Insurgencies. Now all these changes, while new and exciting to check out, also came with their fair share of downfalls. Before the chapter with Insurgencies was introduced, Valenha's content was just jumping from siege to siege or ape to ape. It was a heroic encounter grind fest. When the Bell chapter dropped and Insurgencies started up, siege was long forgotten. The heroic encounter that people once obsessed about now spawns but is never engaged as players have moved on to bigger and better things. The biggest struggle in Mod 18, however, was dealing with Insurgencies. Insurgencies were too short, and then they were too long. While the fine-tuning of these events were corrected over time, there was a decent amount of frustration from the player base, especially when they discovered the 1-hour cooldown between Bell and the Insurgencies. You would have to camp out for forever to try and catch an Insurgency on time, and even then you might not get the full 20% charge you needed for your amulet. This was a nigh impossible task for casual players who could only log in for an hour or two. Thankfully, over time everything was adjusted properly. Props to the Cryptic team for hanging in during that chaos. Our next timeline milestone is the release of the first roadmap. This was a huge step in the improvement of communication between the Neverwinter Cryptic team and the community. On the timeline, we can see general placements of future mods, as well as a new trial and new episode of content called the Saga of Zariel. They also hint at new surprises along the way too, which was pretty cool. One thing I was excited to see was the incorporation of the CDP, or Collaborative Development Program topics. These CDP items like scaling, character progression, and evolving rewards were topics that we players discussed in the forums. These were items that we've been asking for. Spring 2020, the time when chaos began. I'm including this segment on COVID because not only did it greatly influence everyone's everyday lives, but it had a significant impact on the Neverwinter community as well. Game-wise, we saw waves of new or returning players come and check out the game. My alliance personally added a bunch of new recruits. The Cryptic team had to transition to working remotely from home, and we saw some roadmap goals that had to be sacrificed. However, they did a fantastic job at keeping up communication with the community and ended up releasing an updated roadmap a couple months later. June was a crazy busy month. At the top of the month, we saw the announcement of the CCP, or Content Creator Program. This included players that streamed the game and provided guidance to the Neverwinter community through Twitch, YouTube, webpage, and so on. We also experienced Cryptic's 20th year anniversary. And to celebrate, we got a free rank 15 enchantment or runestone choice pack. We also got comp tokens and many other items. The biggest event of June, however, was the release of Mod 19, the Path of the Fallen campaign, and the patch notes that came with it. Now, I mention the patch notes because not only did we see some significant work on balancing the different classes, but there was a huge healer rework introduced. Healers had their divinity system changed to a tab-based marking system, and the magnitudes of healing powers were greatly altered. We saw incoming and outgoing healing percentages decrease to balance the increase in power magnitudes. Pallies could no longer spam full health bar blue shields, and Warlock heals finally got some much needed love, bringing them up to par with the Pally and Cleric heals. It was a tough pill to swallow initially for healers, but once we got adjusted to the new changes, it was a-okay. Anywho, enough healer talk. Let's talk Mod 19. Now this was a similar campaign progression like we saw in Descent into Avernus, with the weekly cap and the dungeon and boon unlocks towards the end of the campaign. Some fun parts of this new mod included map drops, similar to Chult or River District, a timer that spawned a boss depending on whether more demons or devils were killed, and of course, many people's favorite, the cars. Overall, this campaign launched much more smoothly than Mod 18, and the main grind for players who hit their weekly caps was running around killing mobs to get treasure maps for a chance at better gear. When you weren't grinding for treasure maps, many players could be found rising to the occasion to challenge Zariel in the new trial. One thing that was really cool was that they released a normal and a master version of the trial. This was a big step forward from the last trial, Tom, that has a reputation for being exclusive to a large portion of the player base. The master version of Zariel had a quicker and harder hitting mechanics, but it rewarded you with the new celestial weapons. The normal version was much more friendly to non-endgame players and offered epic companion gear drops in the chest at the end. One frustration with the endgame community was that unlike Tom, Zariel did not drop very much loot that was worth the time to farm it. As I myself haven't finished Master Zariel, I can't really weigh in on this argument, but I can understand the frustration. Red Feather Clan gear. Excuse me. So fast forward a couple months, and in August we see a release of the updated roadmap. The Saga of Zariel is now called the Redeemed Citadel, and we see mention of a new race, the Asmar, on the 4th milestone. Looking further, we see 2 more scaling improvement phases as well as a new event called the Harvester of Nightmares. One of the most exciting things, however, is at the very end of the roadmap. New class, baby! And it's officially on paper. My fingers are crossed for a monk. On August 17th, the Redeemed Citadel was finally released. This was Neverwinter's first attempt at a temporary campaign. About once a month, a new milestone was released and the overall storyline evolved. You could progress through the campaign by completing quests and weekly challenges to fill the meter. As more people gained Zariel's favors to fill their meters, the overall service progress bar filled, signaling the completion of that milestone. Each milestone had a leaderboard. If you collected enough Zariel's favors to land within the top 100 players, you received a free, limited skinned item as a reward. Rewards included a Vorpal enchantment, an artifact, a Zariel companion, and of course, the greatly coveted gold wings. Now, if you didn't have time to farm like crazy for favors, Cryptic offered a reskin of the rewards available for purchase on the Zen store. I would like to point out real quick that the campaign did let the community know about the Zen market alternative right away, so if you farmed, good on you. And if you didn't want to or didn't have the time to farm, that's a-okay too. Personally, I gave in and bought those sweet, sweet wings and don't regret it one bit. So, we mentioned that you could get Zariel's favors by doing quests and weekly challenges. Well, you could also gain favors by farming big heroic encounters as well, and we saw a large portion of the player base farming these BHEs for the first couple milestones. The weekly challenges usually encompass 2 quests and 4 dungeons, the dungeons being 2 regular and 2 hardcore. Seeing the hardcore dungeon settings incorporated in the game again was probably one of the biggest things I was personally excited about. Last time we had seen the use of these hardcore dungeon running modes was back in the Acquisitions Incorporated campaign. I honestly really enjoy the challenge of running dungeons in hardcore mode, but then again, maybe I'm just a glutton for punishment. Later on, as the milestones progressed, hunts were unlocked. Certain enemies could now randomly spawn with a hunt mark, and killing them could give you a hunt trophy to lure out and fight bosses. There were 3 tiers of hunt bosses, very similar to what we had seen in the Jolt campaign. Hunts dropped a significant amount of Zariel's favors as well as endgame gear, so they are still being farmed constantly now, even after the Redeemed Citadel has ended, and will probably continue to be farmed until Mod 20 drops. Now let's get into the touchier aspect of this campaign, the rewards. Each milestone, a player could earn the top row of rewards for essentially free as they gained favors to fill the meter. The lower rewards could be unlocked for free if you bought the Milestones Reforgers pack, or you could save up Zariel's favor and buy essentially everything from Yahiel the Trader. Except of course the legendary Insignia Choice pack. Now, there was some confusion behind the Purchasable Reforgers pack and many misconceptions that this was a pay-to-play tactic, or a way for people to get ahead in the race. As usual, the frantic confusion of what was misconstrued. The Reforgers bundle allows a player to play and progress that milestone all on their tunes long after the Redeemed Citadel ends. It's a pay for time, a pay for casual play if you will. I understand that the fear of missing out is a big thing, but if you can't play the RC in time, that's a-okay. I personally had a busy couple of months at work during this event, so this bundle was very convenient, and it'll let me work on my alts in the future. Now that being said, there was a pretty big incentive for buying the Reforgers pack for all 4 milestones. If you bought the packs for all 4 milestones and then completed the milestones, you could unlock the new Asmar race. This race granted +2 to any ability score stats, it boosted party members' HP, and it increased personal, incoming, outgoing healing, HP, and reduced your damage taken, etc. There were many healers and tanks that had their eye on this race, and as soon as they unlocked it, they switched right away. Oh, I almost forgot one of my favorite things about this campaign. As the milestones progressed, the terrain literally evolved with the storyline. Each milestone, after we had fought back more and more demons and devils, the Citadel would become less and less corrupted until it was completely cleansed, as you see it here today. We also saw new minor and major heroic encounters pop up further along the campaign, helping contribute to the story of an evolving war. On August 24th, Cryptic finally revealed its big surprise from the roadmap, a rework of the mount system. All mounts now have powers and can be upgraded all the way up to Mythic. Mounts also contribute to a bolster percentage that helps buff stats like companions. This update also introduced mount collars, which could be slotted in the stables similar to the companion equipment. While most players were excited about this change, there was a sense of bittersweetness as players reflected on how hard it was to get their legendary mounts before, and the sense of depreciation of said mounts. I personally love the change as it allows more players to develop their mounts rather than to rely on RNG. Plus, the thought of riding a mythic prize-winning pig into battle is pretty funny too. In September, we saw the release of a brand new event called the Harvester of Nightmares. In this event, adventurers entered the nightmares of the sleeping citizens of Protector's Enclave. After driving back swarms of enemies, the Harvester would manifest in the form of an existing boss monster. Like Help It, this event lasted several weeks, and different rankings of tokens were awarded the longer players participated. Since the Harvester of Nightmares shares the same reward system as Help It, we saw both Hell Pit and Harvester currencies combined into one system. This means we could count this event towards that excruciatingly long grind for that legendary gold warhorse. Only 2 more tokens to go. On November 18th, Cryptic announced it would be removing bonding runestones from the game. This of course instigated an outcry of protests from a majority of the player base, as bondings take much time and many resources to obtain and rank up. As frustrating as it was, this was a much needed update if we wanted to see scaling properly reworked. The purpose of this change was because, and I quote, "Bonding runestones are an item that can never match up to item level correctly. This is because they transfer a varying amount of stats based upon the companion itself, companion equipment, and runestones. So, over time, our builds have become more and more dependent on our companion page rather than our character page. Hopefully this change will allow us to get a little bit more creative in our builds. I do want to point out some quick positives on the delivery of this update. 1, they posted the update blog super early to let players know the changes before they bought anything during the fall holiday sales. And 2, right off the bat, they included an exchange chart of bonding runestones to astral diamonds. This allowed players to begin to plan accordingly for how they will adapt to the changes. Last but not least, at the top of December, we received news that Neverwinter was going to implement a huge combat rework update. There's a lot I could go on about this topic, so let me just cover the bare minimum. Some stats are gone, some stats are new, item level matters, and stat percentages are now a thing. Green is good, orange is good within reason, radiance, empowers, and bondings no longer bis, you can swap them at a vendor. Chaos here, whining there, optimism overall, you get the gist. Now the goal of this update was to improve scaling, make stat balancing easier to understand, make item level more accurate, make it easier to gear up, and to allow players to make both creative and or minimum maximum builds. This rework dropped on preview early December, and since then we have seen many iterations of improvements thanks to communication through the forums. There has been guide after guide on YouTube to help players understand the changes, and Cryptic has been doing weekly or bi-weekly Q&A Twitch streams for further explanation of the changes. Overall, I'm excited for the new combat rework, and I hope this adjustment period will be relatively painless. Phew, okay, that was a lot of information, and honestly, I feel like I didn't even cover half of the stuff that went on. Heck, there were a lot of events and free gifts that I didn't even touch on. You know what? Let me list them off real quickly. Events that occurred in 2020 were
Feast of Lanterns, Challenge of Gods, Wonders of Gond, Siege of Neverwinter, Neverember's Recruitment, April Fool's Day, Coins of Joaquin, Tales of Old, Tomorrow's Gift, Protector's Jubilee, Help It, the second time, Celebration of Yura, Summer Festival, Siege of Neverwinter, Harvester of Nightmares, Masquerade of Liars, Dungeon Delver's Delight, and Winter Festival.
And probably a couple other events I missed. We also had freebies like
Fallen Stronghold's Treasure Chest, free improved bag of holding, free rank 15 enchantment, Genie's gift pack, Sheltered Wizard's cash, comp upgrade tokens, comp equipment choice pack, rank 15 runestone choice pack, anniversary rewards, mount upgrade adjustment items, reroll tokens,
and so on. Overall, this year we saw a bunch of development in the game, some roadblocks and some smashing successes. I hope you enjoyed this review of 2020, and let me know in the comments some of your thoughts. Did I miss anything? Would you like to see something like this again in the future? I had a lot of fun making this review and can't wait to work on my next project. Until then, I hope you guys have a fantastic day.